So this panel is about startups, and we are going to talk about the state of Japanese startup ecosystem and how we can accelerate further here. But before we start, I want to ask you a question. So how many of you would describe yourself you are from the startup ecosystem? So you are either a founder or working for startups, or you're an investor, or you are working with the startups on a regular basis. Could you raise your hand? Roughly maybe 40%, maybe roughly half. I would assume the other half is less familiar with the startups. So maybe with that in mind, I'll give you a little bit of context of what's happening in the Japanese startups before we open the panel. So I've been with the VC, GLOBIS Capital, for about 10 years, a little more than 10 years. And we've seen a tremendous growth in the Japanese startup ecosystem in the last 10 years or so. And we can measure it in so many ways, but one way to look at it is supply of capital. So amount that goes into startups every year. It used to be less than $1 billion back in 2013. Last year, it was about 800 billion yen, so which is like $6 billion. So it has increased by sixfold in the last 10 years. And also, in terms of the number of unicorns, we used to have none 10 years ago. Right now, we have about 17 unicorns. And if we take out a little bit of unconventional ones, we're still left with 12 or 13 unicorns in Japan. And it used to be said that Japanese startup ecosystem very domestic, and no global investor would invest in here. That was true about 10 years ago. But lately, we started to see a lot of very big and famous US VC funds started to make investment in Japan. So about 2-3 weeks ago, a VC called Bessemer, very famous on cloud investment, they made their first investment in Japan. They will announce their second one in very few weeks. Also, Khosla Ventures, NEA, all those famous funds have started to make investment in Japan. And I know the partners who make those deals, and they're all very eager to make more investments here in Japan. And government, as you may know, is a very, very pro-startup. So about 2 years ago, 2022, the government has announced a 5-year plan to accelerate further the Japanese startup ecosystem. And one of the big goals for that plan is to further 10x the amount that goes into startup every year. So they want to hit 10 trillion yen, which is like maybe $6 billion, which is further 10x the current figure that we have. Also, they want to have 100 unicorns produced by Japan. We have 17 right now, as I said. So we have a lot of room for growth. We have a lot of things to do, but the government is very, very encouraging it. And also the corporation. I think almost all the big major corporations in Japan have some sort of CVC programs. They are working with startups through business alliances, investment, sometimes M&A. So it looks like everything is moving in the right direction in the Japanese startup ecosystem. But having said that, one of the big challenges that we face are attracting global talents. And this is same with the founders as well as people who work at startups. I looked through the figure through ChatGPT that in the US there are about 500 to 600 unicorns active right now, of which about 40% have at least one founder or co-founder who is not from the US. So that's a lot so almost half of the unicorns in Japan, in the US, produced or started by non-US nationals. Whereas in Japan, of the 17 unicorns that I mentioned, I could only think of one, maybe two companies that is founded by non-Japanese founder. And also, if we look at people working at those startups, we still have a lot of things to do in order to attract more global talent Of course, the government is doing a lot to do this, but I think there are more things we can do. So that is like the whole context of the startup ecosystem in Japan. So things are moving in the right direction. 10x increase the last 10 years. We started to produce some Japanese unicorns. Global investors are taking notice and starting to make investments. But having said that, the attracting global talent is one of the still a big key challenges that we have to overcome. So with that context, I want to ask the panelists, who are all non-Japanese professional founders, started here in Japan. What are their experiences like? And maybe before that, I'm going to ask each of you to make some introduction. What businesses are you building? What business are you building? And what's your founder journey like, starting your business in Japan? Maybe I'll start with Chris.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. The first time I spoke here was 8 years ago, and it was almost the same panel. And both of you have become friends since.
Yeah.
So,
but we were in a smaller room. Now we have got a
we were in a
room.
smaller room.
That shows the growth of the maybe startup ecosystem.
Maybe. I came to Japan 11 years ago, prior to which I worked in a venture capital firm in New York. And I came here and started a company with my best friend. And the company is called Schmatz. And it's not a technology company, even though that's what I used to do before. It's a German beer company. And Schmatz started with the two of us and 22,000 US dollars. And because that's not a lot of money, we ended up living on 2 air mattresses that we bought at Don Quixote in the attic of a warehouse in Nakameguro. And we started driving a food truck around town. So we had a very nimble start. And from that very beginning, we found tremendous amounts of support. I remember the first visit to the local police station asking about food truck regulations, and in Meguro, and everyone around gathered, very interested what those 2 Germans were doing. And they were very supportive. And that was my experience throughout. Schmatz has grown. We now have about 40 restaurants. We employ 1,050 people here in Japan. My best friend is still my best friend, and he's now running that business, which has allowed me to build another business. And now I'm back to technology and investments. So I launched a business called Way Equity Partners, which is an investment firm. It's not a fund. It's a balance sheet investment firm, which means we deploy our own capital, and we're looking to partner with ambitious people who want to build very large and very important companies. With a slightly different spin to a traditional venture capital fund. We provide long-term capital pre-launch, and we're more looking for people who are at a later stage in their career that aren't necessarily able to bootstrap a business, right? I have 2 wonderful little boys. I have responsibilities that wouldn't allow me to move back onto that air mattress even if I wanted to. I don't want to. So we think it's important to provide ways into the ecosystem to people who are experienced yet unable to do it, as nimble as we did. And in that context, we've built, so we look to build 4 to 6 software companies per year and invest in them. And we build mainly mid-market SaaS and B2B marketplaces.
By the way, how many of you have been to Schmatz? Oh, 20%-ish. Maybe on the way home, you can stop by, have a beer. Okay, thanks, Chris. Jordan?
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here again with familiar faces. My journey in Japan started in 2008 when I came out here as a new grad, worked in finance for about 8 years. I was here, maybe like many of you, living in Japan because it's the best quality of life in the world, right? It's clean, safe, trains run on time, people are nice, amazing culture. However, when I was getting married, having a kid, moving homes, there were a lot of very inefficient parts of society that started to come out. And society's expectation was that my wife would take care of these inefficient things. I'm an engineer by background. Things that are inefficient or unfair are what drive me crazy. And so realized that even though there's probably arguably the best services in the world in Japan, it was very hard to hire them for things that we needed done. If we wanted to hire a plumber, a photographer, a personal trainer, services like these, And so it led me to launch a company called Zeitomo, which is a marketplace for local services in Japan. We cover about 600 different types of services across all 47 prefectures. And while at first I thought I was building it more for my own pain point of it being hard to hire service professionals, I soon realized that service professionals in Japan actually had a bigger pain point, which was growing their business. And plumbers were maybe still using fax machines and not knowing how to run and grow their business online. And so we shifted our focus to really supporting these small businesses in Japan. And if you think of Japan's economy, it's an economy of small businesses in the services sector. And improving productivity there is something I found very meaningful and very impactful. So we grew Zeitomo over the last kind of 8 years. From bootstrapping as well with my co-founder to now being around 100 employees. We've raised around 30 million US from over 50 investors, so both very domestic investors and banks and corporates to also top-tier investors from Silicon Valley and a lot in between. So I've been really, very grateful that I've been able to interact with so many different types of people, but also be able to see the different styles of both Japanese founders, foreign founders, and also foreign investors and Japanese investors. Earlier this year, in March, I took a step back as chairman, no longer involved in the day-to-day operations of Zeitomo. And I was trying to figure out how to use my energy and my time during the day in the most meaningful way possible. And came to realize that me being at the intersection of these different perspectives on Japan's startup ecosystem, as Emery mentioned, Japan has 10x over the last 10 years, trying to 10x again. The biggest bottleneck that I identified was really just ambition in the startup ecosystem. There's plenty of smart people, there's plenty of capital, there's plenty of white space to innovate in, but there just weren't enough ambitious founders, and then there weren't enough people that maybe have started ambitious that had the pathway to continue to go out and to grow and build massive businesses. And so if we want to build the next Toyotas or Sonys or Recruits or SoftBanks, that pipeline, I didn't see enough of people in the startup ecosystem that were being supported by the right people. And so it was often the small IPO in Japan, over 100 IPOs in Japan last year, average market cap less than $100 million. And so there's a lot of knowledge and experience around doing that. But if we were trying to build unicorns and decacorns, there weren't as many experienced people in the ecosystem coming back into the startup ecosystem and supporting that. So I'm doing two things now. One is I'm bringing Antler, which is the most active investor in the world, to Japan. And we just launched our residency from October 1st. We had around 1,000 people apply to it in a mix of kind of internationally and Japanese, which I can come back to. And the other is I'm looking at more liquidity options in the startup ecosystem. So alternatives to the small IPO, rather, and looking to bring best practices when it comes to secondary investment to Japan.
Great. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks a lot. And Oya?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Oya, the founder and CEO of Oira. At Oira, we provide on-demand interpretation services in 153 languages. We are a global startup, although founded and headquartered in Tokyo, Japan. 40% of our users are actually outside Japan. And while we are doing this human-based on-demand interpretation services through our app, we have been collecting data to actually further improve AI's performance, especially for niche languages. We have been around for 7 years. So I started up in 2016, 17. And before that, I was actually working at a consulting firm, the Boston Consulting Company. And while I was actually working there, I have faced the issue that like many foreign friends of mine were calling me almost on a daily basis, where they had communication language issues in hospitals, in city halls, real estate agencies, so on and so forth. So that was the reason that I have started Oira. And through that journey, I thought in the beginning it would have been a very easy and comfortable journey. But starting up a business as a foreigner in Japan had both good and very challenging sides, which I would be very happy to share here. I'm originally from Turkey. I have been living in Japan for 18 years, and I have also naturalized, so I'm a Japanese citizen now.
Okay, thanks, Oya. So So you're usually based in Tokyo, I would assume, but you're now on a business trip to the US?
Right. I have around a month of time here in the US, especially for our AI strategy. I'm joining you now from Los Angeles.
Thanks a lot. I hope time zone is not too crazy there.
It's
So
great.
yeah, so you mentioned that you had both a positive and negatives experience while you are starting your business and growing it here in Japan. And let's go there. Do you want to share what your experiences were like or have been like, starting your business and growing it here in Japan?
Sure, thank you. So on the positive side, I think Japan was one of the best markets and is still one of the best markets for us because there is a good variety of foreign nationalities here in Japan. Most of the people are coming from Southeast Asian countries, which have niche languages like Nepalese, Burmese, Indonesian, Vietnamese. So even today, AI cannot really perform well in those languages. So Japan is a great market for us. That's number one. On the other hand, regardless of Japan being a great country to live, I, by the way, really love Japan. I think if you live in Japan, it's safe, it's clean, it's convenient. So as a founder, actually, like you can really focus on your business while having a really nice lifestyle in Japan. That's one of the advantages as well. However, and also I can say that like one thing which is I think very dominant when I compare Japan with other countries, which has both good and bad sides. But compared to other countries, Japan is very stable and predictable in many ways. What consumers like or businesses need doesn't change overnight. So that's both good and bad for startups. Good because you don't have to deal with ever-changing environment and ever-changing competition. But bad because you have to really fight if you want to provide something new or unknown. And if you're B2B, the initial start is also very hard because corporates in Japan are not so open to fresh businesses. They want to see some track record and trust from the industry. So that is in the beginning are very, very challenging. And the businesses here, like move very, very slowly. So you are facing a huge rock, trying to build a track record to have some trust. And penetrate into the 2B business, and you can't expect results to be too quick. So that was one of the things. And another thing is like regulations. Japan is a very risk-averse country. Regulations are very strict, and so it can be a big negative for some innovative companies trying new technologies. For example, Waymo now, autonomous driving taxi is all over in San Francisco. United States, allows them to do pilot runs in the city, but that won't be so easy in Japan, because Japan wants to make sure that everything is 100% safe before you can roll anything, new out. This can be a very tiring process, depending on, how different the solution is. These were the some challenges. Of course, like there was Jordan's comment on some businesses moving on fax still, which I also faced in the past. But these are, like some little funny anecdotes from the past and sometimes still. Yeah, I mean, overall, like Japan has good and bad sides for startups and also for foreign founders as well.
Thanks, Oya. I thought it was very interesting that you describe Japan as stable and predictable, which has both good elements for startups as well as negative side. Chris, do you want to add, talk about your experience, especially comparing to the one that you had during Rocket Internet outside of Japan?
Yeah, with pleasure. As I already alluded to, my experience has been overwhelmingly positive, right? I couldn't agree more that every market has its advantages and disadvantages. I find Japan a very, very favorable environment to build companies into. I think I would probably dissect it into, maybe let's call it market capital people, right? On the market side, it's one of the largest economies in the world, and it has among the lowest rate of entrepreneurship in the world, unfortunately. But that creates an environment where you have, at least in the growth stage, a smaller subset of competitors, and competitors are not good for emerging businesses. So I think that's a huge positive. I agree with Oya again that the market it's more trust and relationship based. I think more deals are still made on the golf club than in the boardroom. And that takes time to get into. At the same time, our experience was we needed to build relationships with the big real estate developers, and that took time, right? So it wasn't straight off the bat, we got the great location in the new Mitsubishi Tower. But once we had built the relationships, and we now work with Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo, those are amazing relationships to have, right? Because they are relationships built on trust. They don't just optimize for short-term profitability, they optimize for long-term partnerships. And in our case, they were incredibly supportive, right? Even if they thought we were too young or too early, they definitely didn't think we were too foreign, right? I remember one of my first meetings was the Mitsubishi Jisho Shacho, and he loved the fact that two Germans had come here and built a business. He thought it was, exciting, fun, and he was happy to support us. So on the market side, I'm positive. Capital, I don't think there's a shortage. I actually think there's a lot of early stage, high quality early stage growth capital available locally, and a lot of demand for Japan exposure globally. So we've raised about, all in, probably about $100 million US, non-local, all international, and we found a lot of interest from all types of different allocators, the top tier funds that are coming in, family offices that have looked for ways to build exposure to the market. So I don't think there's a shortage there on the early stage. I think there might be more space on the growth stage, but that's a different topic. And on the people side, I think that's actually where the biggest shortage is. I think there's so many well-trained people, right? It's an amazing education system that people get, almost free access to. People are, it's a qualitative experience, but from the 1,000 people at Schmatz, it's an overwhelmingly delightful experience to work with people in Japan. People work hard, they are committed, they are principled, at least my qualitative experience. So it's not the lack of talent per se. I do think that when it comes to building companies, it's, people that choose that path is still very rare, which is unfortunate because I think there's a lot of people that have the ability to do so, right? That's not the bottleneck, the talent. And then there's something to be said about the flywheel of Silicon Valley, right? In Silicon Valley, or even in Germany at this point, if you're building, let's say, a B2B SaaS company, right, you can almost surgically hire stage-based, right? You're going into a stage where you're growing from 10 to 50 million in revenue. You can find the head of sales who's gone through exactly that phase before at probably 2 different companies at this point, and all that knowledge compounds and moves into your business. And due to the, let's say, early stages of the ecosystem here, those, like that part of hiring people from growth is hard. So I think that's a scarce point.
Thanks a lot, Chris. So you mentioned the market is great, the capital is abundant, the people are hardworking and diligent, but I guess Japan lacks the experienced people who have seen like tremendous growth, and it's going to take time because of the depth of the startup ecosystem. Jordan, what's your experiences like?
Yeah, I'd really, echo most of those points. I do think there's a number of challenges in the ecosystem, but all those challenges are opportunities. So because there aren't as many people who have experience building billion-dollar businesses, there aren't as many high growth competitors that are out there. And I think just being aware, as being a foreigner is, I think, a double-edged sword in Japan, and you're able to open up a lot of doors, but it also helps to then have, those relationships already in place. So I think the 5-year startup plan that was announced a couple of years ago for me was very exciting, not because anything actually changed from, say, a decade ago. I think all the challenges that I had when I was starting a company 8 years ago are still very much the problem a couple of years ago, but now they've actually just been identified by the government, and 49 policy items listed out saying these are 49 problems, and it is good to do something about them. And what that's done is it said that it's now socially acceptable to start a company. It's now good for the economy. It's good for the future of Japan. If young people want to have a pension in 30, 40 years, we need to innovate. And I remember when I was starting off, one of the bigger challenges in hiring people from established companies was convincing them that we weren't some sort of like shady scam machine, right? And we would have, calls, and we would have calls with their in-laws or someone who's about to get married. I'd have my an early investors sitting in the audience have a call with somebody who was thinking to join or talk to them. They're a real company, and so I think there's different risks, of course, but I do think that what I'm very excited about right now is, I guess, the public sentiment, and that it's now socially okay and a good thing to do, and the flywheel of talent that needs to be developed in Japan. I think we are at the very early stages of that, but I do think that's one of the most important things that's needed for us to actually really build out the ecosystem, and more people encouraged to kind of take on risk. And when it comes to investors as well, I mean, yes, there's a lot of capital, but I can't tell you how many times raising a seed round or Series A round, I'm asked for the PL plan until IPO, right? At seed, right? And I think that way of thinking has just been the traditional way that companies had been grown and exited in the past. And I think there's a lot of valuable parts of doing the exercise. But raising from investors in Japan is very often very different from raising from investors outside of Japan. And so raising a growth round, is it a pre-IPO round or is it a growth round? These are very different ways that businesses are looked at. So I do think that as the entrepreneurs in this space continue to build more muscles at building up massive companies, I think the investors as well hopefully get experience supporting more companies through these kind of unicorn, decacorn size outcomes, and be able to support companies along that talent stack is what I hope for.
Great. Thanks for sharing experience and perspective. I'm a little bit confused right now because I think all three of you said that Japan is a very favorable place to start a business. You've had good experiences doing that here. But on the other hand, I have the statistics by OECD Talent Attractive Survey saying that Japan is ranked 21st out of 24 countries in terms of attracting global talent. Where do you think is this discrepancy is coming from?
I mean, if you can't speak Japanese, it's very hard. So when you say attracting global talent, I think all three of us have made the effort to. Oh, it's Lester in your case, but
well, I speak it now, but neither my co-founder nor I spoke a word when we came here.
Yeah.
Actually.
And how was it, like not being able to speak Japanese and starting a business here?
Yeah, I mean, hard, right? Hard, but then again, like before, I was in New York, and I think I'd rather not speak the language than go against 10 highly skilled, highly capitalized competitors. Right, and before that, I was in Mexico, where I speak Spanish, but then we were doing e-commerce, and I think we lost something about 20% of all packages. And only 5% of the population had credit cards. Like, that's hard too, right? So you have the language barrier, but then at the same time, I'd argue that you kind of have emerging market opportunity set, but then developed market risk, right? So it's amazing, I think.
Great. Oh yeah, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, Japan is a great country for many reasons, and as Chris mentioned, there are like both good and bad sides in it. So Japan is very stable, very predictable. Everything works. That's nice. Japanese language is a very, very big kind of a deal breaker at many times. That's one thing. Another thing that what I can say is that I don't think the environment in Japan is very suitable for foreigners to come here and live. So I am the director of Gaikokujin Koyo Kyogikai, so like an association, an organization which is working towards making a good environment for foreigners to work and live in Japan. And I know many struggles that foreigners are facing. They don't have to be entrepreneurs, but like there are like issues in banking system, in real estate, in like many areas that actually foreign entrepreneurs would face in their daily lives before they can even like start building their companies here. That's one reason. Another reason is that, as I have mentioned before, if it's a B2B business, actually building the trust, building the relationships, and actually making a success in the B2B area as a foreigner will take time. So probably, like many people are giving up in that aspect as well. So these are my kind of experiences that I can tell.
One thing that I've noticed, and I notice it both locally and globally, I think a lot has to do with sentiment and narrative, right? In Japan, a lot of people that I speak to tend to be relatively pessimistic, right? And one of the reasons why they don't start a company is because they think it's too hard, right? And they can't absorb that level of risk, right? But then also the overall pessimistic sentiment about the market in itself, which I don't share. But then globally, I mean, when one of the most common things that people ask me, or people think rather, is that Japan is incredibly expensive to live, right? And at this point, I mean, I just came back from London. Japan is unfortunately incredibly cheap, right? Right, you can eat here amazing food much cheaper than anywhere else. So I think people have this view from abroad that Japan is an expensive, hard to enter market that isn't trying to attract global talent, right? So I think there's something to be said about changing or editing that narrative to some extent. That could probably help.
Yeah, I just maybe add that if you're to do the rankings of the risk reward ratio for where it makes sense to start a company, I think Japan would be at the top. Like what you have to lose versus working at a large Japanese corporate versus experiences that you gain in doing that, and your odds of success, just given how much fewer competitors there are and how much, again, your personal burn doesn't need to be as high. I think the risk reward makes sense for pretty much everybody who's ambitious to do something like that to start in Japan.
Right. And one more thing that I would like to add is that, especially, like being in the US, and I've also been to other regions as well, I think there's a marketing issue as well. I mean, not many global startups are considering Japan as their, first or second, at least top 3 countries that they would like to, build their businesses. I think like marketing and, how Japan is known globally might have some kind of like issues as well. Underrepresentation, basically. And 2 more things that I've also heard from other founders is one more issue is corporate tax. Actually, Japan doesn't make a high incentive area for for business who would like to go big because of corporate tax. That's what I've heard. So Singapore or Hong Kong or Switzerland in that case are kind of more favorable options. And another thing which I have mentioned in the beginning is high regulations, especially for new technologies. For instance, we have experienced this same thing when cryptocurrencies were new and hot. So, like blockchain technologies and all, now in AI as well. So Japan doesn't take risks. So they like if you want to do something adventurous a little bit, so it will be difficult for you to do in Japan.
Okay, thanks. So startups is all about turning challenges into opportunities. The next question I want to ask the panelists is, what are the biggest opportunity you see in the Japanese startups? Now, of course, especially Chris and Jordan being an investor, where do you see the most opportunities coming from?
I mean, I think there's a lot of. There's opportunity left, right, and center, right? And so I think there's different ways to segment it. But I think what a lot of people talk about in the ecosystem is maybe the intersection of kind of hardware and AI. The last few decades, Silicon Valley has been a lot of software that's come out. And Japan has kind of missed software the last few decades. And what I hear now is in Silicon Valley, people are trying to relearn hardware. What does that mean? How do we actually make it work? Whereas in Japan, I was computer science background, and people coming out in my class in California would go on to software companies, and that was very common. Whereas peers in Japan were like, what do you mean you're going to build a website? We want to build like robots. We want to work on, harder problems. And so I think Japan has a little bit of an edge when it comes to just talent that exists in the hardware space, and now how that intersects with AI. I'd also say healthcare, and we are leading when it comes to gray hair, right? And as an aging society, and so there is not so much kind of aversion to AI so much in terms of taking jobs. Just we have a decreasing workforce, and so I think those are a few areas that are looked at. That said, I do think that almost every area has room for innovation, and there's so many things that are working great in Japan that we don't need to change, but almost everything else has, I think, room for the ambitious to come out and do something.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah. Coming from maybe a macro thesis, but I would agree with Jordan to some extent that I think there's a lot of opportunities, but I think the biggest macro opportunity is probably on the labor side, right? The fact that Japan unfortunately has a population problem, and people leave the workforce more so than they enter it, right? So you have and that is, I think, multiplied by the requirement to speak Japanese to work in most Japanese corporations, right? So the labor shortage here is hard to solve through immigration. If you're looking at white collar, right? If you're looking at service, I think we've all seen a significant change over the last 10 years, right? And I think that's fantastic. If you think about working in the back office of Mitsubishi, it's unlikely that you're able to do that without speaking fluent Japanese. And I think that's where a lot of the opportunity set will come from, right? The inevitable requirement of digitalizing workflows, because the labor to do those workflows simply isn't there, right? And I think that's a very strong impetus, and that's where we see opportunity in the mid-market and in enterprise. The second thing I think is, I think we are on the right track, right? The top tier funds you mentioned coming in, the six-fold increase of venture capital being deployed here, the quality of investors increasing rapidly. And then I do think it's fair to say that global capital follows returns, right? So the global narrative is shifting a lot on the capital allocation side, right? Buffett coming in here making a big move, even though he didn't really have to put up any money for it. But then also private equity coming in droves, it feels like. I do think more capital will come into the market, and I do think that will continue to increase the probabilities of being funded, increase the probabilities of growing faster, of skipping the IPO and building larger companies. So I think the capital part is important.
Thanks a lot. And the labor shortage that you mentioned, I think it's connected to the Jordan's point, of robots and hardware. So because we faced such a labor shortage, yes, there's a lot of opportunity for SaaS and software-based productivity improvement, but also on the hardware side, maybe we'll see more robots being in play in Japan because of the labor shortage. Oh yeah, what do you see? What do you think is the biggest opportunity in Japan?
I agree to all of you. I think, due to the aging population now, there are increasing number of foreigners, and there are many problems around foreigners and their lifestyles. In that sense, you can actually also observe that many large Japanese companies, they are now initiating new businesses around these issues. For instance, foreigners who have been in Japan under 6 months. When you come first, you can't open a bank account. So, for instance, like there are companies who are providing these bank accounts and then credit cards, and then they are trying to solve this real estate issue, which is foreigners can't really rent a place easily. So there are now many yachin hosho, like guarantor businesses coming up, and you would not even think when you look at those companies and their profiles and the businesses that they are in, you wouldn't imagine that they would go into this gaikokujin business. But now many Japanese large corporations are focusing on this emerging market, but they don't know much about foreigners. So I think there is a big field for foreign founders as first-hand experienced people trying to solve these foreigner issues in Japan, and also on top of that, aging population. So I think there's a huge opportunity in healthcare or other services that could be catered to elderly people in Japan.
Thanks. You mentioned, foreigners in Japan could be a good business, and I looked at the statistics, and then there are 3.5 million foreigners right now in Japan, which is a 50% increase from the 10 years ago. And I think I would argue that it's one of the largest growing, demographic in Japan, and especially it has accelerated in the last 2 years after COVID. So it has been growing maybe 10% year after year. So that's a great segment. So maybe in a few minutes, we will start, getting questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please think of some. But before that, I'm going to ask the last question, which is that we are going to have a new prime minister. We have a new prime minister, but if you are to become the next prime minister, with the power to change a lot of things, policies and stuff, what is one thing that you would like to change in order to accelerate more startup activity here in Japan? And let's start with Jordan.
So I actually think that what the government did with the 5-year plan is one of the best things that it could have done. As I mentioned earlier, just the messaging from that is more important than any one of the 49 policy items that are going to come out. I actually think that it's now that that direction has been set, and the best thing the government can do is continue to say that the country needs innovation. Risk-taking is welcome. Taking startups, more role models within the ecosystem being kind of lifted up on a pedestal. I think that's the best thing that can be done, more so than any one particular policy item or another. I do think that the ball is now more in the private sector's court to actually take this momentum, this opportunity to build and to build companies, to invest into companies, and yeah, there's nothing really holding companies back. So that's kind of one view that I do have. I think one view that I'm not sure so much about is English. I think the easiest way to kind of build a more international startup ecosystem and to kind of companies to go more globally is just more English, and that being kind of more the primary language for things that happen in startups. That said, Japan is great because it's Japan, and I don't think we all just want it to turn into another kind of, a Singapore version of Japan. And so I'm personally quite mixed on that, but I do think, just from growing the economy perspective or the future, how much English should be a driving role of that or not. I think right now there are very different islands. There's the Japanese startup ecosystem, there's the international startup ecosystem, and the founders and the investors. So, to that extent, one thing I'm trying to do with Antler is that we're running it in English for the first time. And we have around 1,000 people apply. And of the cohort, we take the top 60 to 70 people we want to bet on. And 60% are actually international founders, most of which are already in Japan. And the other 40% are Japanese founders that don't have English allergies. Doesn't mean they're great at English. By doing that co-founder matching between those, where you can actually have, because I still think it's very hard to build a company from Japan if you don't speak Japanese. And it's very hard to build a global company with those aspirations if you don't have that experience. So kind of pairing up more people is something that we're looking to do on the private side, but I'd encourage more initiatives similar to that.
So firstly, I think it's very unlikely that I'll be the next prime minister. If I were to think about it, so what I found very interesting is, right, we've made 4 investments this year, and we partnered with 4 really remarkable founders who are all very ambitious, right? None of them want to build small businesses. They all want to build the next, Toyota, the next Rakuten, those size of outcomes. And that's also what we're looking for, right? This is not a cash grab for us. This is us trying to have a large impact in a country that has given us so much opportunity. And what I found very interesting about them is none of them are building these companies with us to buy a jet or a yacht or a villa, right? And if I look at the US, I think this narrative of, the American dream also being about personal wealth creation, right? It's very prominent, and it arguably is also important because in the US, you do need a lot of money to live well at this point, as sad as that is. In Japan, I think we've touched upon it, the social infrastructure and the business infrastructure is amazing. You can live extremely well, right? So what I found with these founders is they're not in it for the money, they're in it to have an impact, right? To find meaning in what they do by helping solve the problems that Japan faces. And I think that's very powerful, right? I think that helped both in Germany and Japan post-war, right? This collective calling for duty, right, of rebuilding drove a lot of those big companies being built. So I think it's more about, Japan embracing that it's not Silicon Valley, right? Japan is not the United States. It doesn't have to be either. Germany isn't either. It's more about owning a narrative, mirroring what you said, right? Like sentiment, owning a narrative that now is an important moment for people to, go and build meaningful infrastructure for the future. Otherwise, we'll all have a problem. And I think that will really resonate with people here because people are looking for meaning and purpose.
Thanks. Prime Minister Oya, any policy suggestion before we go into Q&A?
Sure. Very briefly, if I were the prime minister, I would definitely work on the immigration policy. So whom you are bringing is very, very important, and I would be very careful with this. So now there are many blue collars entering Japan. So you have mentioned there are like 3.5 million foreigners, but the biggest increase has been around Gino Jishusei, Tokute Gino. So these like blue collar workers, and I appreciate that they are coming in and helping the Japanese society. However, I think we should think while robotics and AI is merging and improving, do we really need simple labor force? I personally would think the opposite. We need the best minds, we need the best engineers, the best designers, best architects, best entrepreneurs. So I would definitely really think about the immigration policy and whom we really want them to come to Japan.
Very clear. Thanks a lot. So with that, I would like to move on to the Q&A. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, state your name, and also keep your question within 30 seconds. Yes, gentleman here.
Hello, Professor.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if I need him. Oh, okay, very good. All right, hello, everyone. My name is Steve Zurcher. I'm the Dean of the Asian Studies Program at Kansai Gaida University. So I just have a few comments. One, I manage foreign students, so I have 500 foreign students on campus this semester, and about a year ago, to your point, they began to explain to me how cheap Japan is, which I had never heard before, and I hadn't thought myself. So that is definitely happening, because they're converting back in their minds to euros or dollars or whatever it may be. Another thing that's interesting, to address this issue of global talent, at the beginning of the semester, I have an orientation, so I have 400 students in front of me, and I ask how many of you want to, after you graduate, because our students have to go back to their home universities and graduate, how many of you want to work in Japan? 5 years ago, that was 20%. It's now 80%. I can't believe it. 80% of the foreign students now who are here in Japan who want the foreign exchange experience at our school, now also when they graduate want to work. This is a very important source of talent for you guys. So if I can self-promote here a little bit, and also on behalf of the students in the room here for GLOBIS, because we are the school as well, I run an internship program in the summer. You guys need to find these foreign students that want to live here after they graduate and work with them for a month or two during the summer, and then you can find talent. They'll come back to you. Simple story, Fusion Systems, Mike Alfont, maybe some of you know that. I placed one student there, internship, went back home, graduated, worked for Fusion Systems. He's now a support engineer for Cloudflare here in Japan, and he just bought his own home. American, so it's happening. So that's not a question, but just if you have any comments.
Yeah. Thanks for the great comments. Let's take several questions at once. So maybe gentleman with the glasses. Oh, sorry, in the back, and also we will go to you afterwards. She's gonna go first, and then she.
Hey, Matt Romaine from Shisen Capital. I know a couple of you guys, so thanks for your insight. Just a couple data points I'm trying to wrap my head around. So one of the largest fundraisers in the United States, basically, which is OpenAI, raised as much money as the entire Japan did last year in the venture ecosystem. Jordan, you had a really interesting comment about the risk reward of working in a Japanese company. Totally agree. But let's be honest, most foreigners probably wouldn't want to work in a Japanese company anyway. And I totally agree with what Oya was saying, where the immigration policy should start to really think about how to keep the high value talent in Japan. My question is, so after you might have that kind of policy change or an encouragement, we're talking about an economy where 1 in 3 people are 60 years and older, and it's aging even more. It's a shrinking ecosystem. How do we actually want to keep that high value talent in Japan? What needs to change, whether it's the Japanese companies or other policy changes?
Very great question. Thanks a lot. And let's take several questions. Maybe your question.
Hi, I'm Simran. My question is like beginning comes from inside. Like I am from India. I've launched my 2 startups. I failed those startups. I worked in 3 startups. For me back home, it was very easy to launch one, to work in one. It was widely accepted there. And in 10 years, it has grown immensely. We rely on everything from groceries to high-end things on startup that have launched. But in Japan, like I face a lot of issues. You can't get groceries in 10 minutes here. So like, is it because the Japanese people have not accepted it as a culture, or the young generation is not promoted? Like the risks are highlighted too much because of it, the culture, the startup culture. Because if you are in a startup culture, you have to wear multiple hats, even if in the role that you are hired for. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe one last question over here. Sorry.
I have a specific question to Prime Minister Oya. So my question is, as a normal citizen of the Japanese, so what can I do to promote your idea, like getting more entrepreneurs and specialists from the overseas? So I'm not a politician, but is there anything that a normal citizen like me can do to promote such kind of the momentum to getting more talented people to Japan? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All great questions. So Prime Minister Oya can answer that, the last question. And a question on how to keep the great talent, who want to take? Okay, Jordan want to take? And then maybe Chris can add. And also if you touch on the how to promote more startup, how to encourage more entrepreneurs to start Japan. Maybe start with Chris first.
I would probably, maybe this is a bit of a divergence from the opinion. I completely agree on bringing in skilled labor and maybe again going to my point about the narrative, making it clear to them how large of an opportunity set we're dealing with. And I think that narrative is underway because of the capital allocators moving in here. I do think if you look at this statistic that you, Emre, started out with of immigrant founders in the US, I think it's important to be nuanced there and to acknowledge that a lot of them were not necessarily high-skilled from another country, but they were also second generation who came usually as the children of blue-collar workers, right? So I do think that the current, my wife's from Southeast Asia, I have a view resulting from that. I do think there's a lot of talented people that come here who don't necessarily fit the profile that probably we represent, but that I think out of very different reasons would make great entrepreneurs. So historically, entrepreneurship is a story of resilience, of grit, of need for economic betterment for the next generation. And I think it's important to not forget that. So my point would be both, continuing to build a narrative around bringing high-skilled labor and making the opportunity set visible, but also, finding a way to empower blue-collar labor or their children, giving them a chance to build something here.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. From my side, I just see opportunity everywhere in blue collar and white collar, and I feel like yes, we need to take a balanced approach with bring people in, but Japan's soft power being the strongest it's maybe ever been. I do think, whether it be the 500 students that are here, 80% wanting to work here, whether it be people who are looking for opportunities in Japan or have come to Japan and starting companies. I think one thing that Japan has not done well is figuring out how to actually utilize a lot of this talent in the labor force and meaningful productivity. And so you either have maybe high talent individuals from overseas that are kind of squished into certain roles where they can't necessarily unlock their max productivity. Or you have people that are like, hey, I want to work here. And I've seen so many people like this who are great, maybe marketers or sales or finance people, but the jobs available in Japan, if you don't speak native English, if you don't speak native Japanese, was that of a headhunter, an English teacher, or kind of an engineer, or very limited roles maybe within kind of investment banking. And so I think for all the other very talented people, who can hire them and actually utilize their skills, there's a massive opportunity for whoever is in a position to hire and use those people because you're able to hire them for much less than you would hire them in the US. And I think you can kind of create a lot more value with them. So I'd say anyone that doesn't have a good place to work, start a company that would then utilize those people, and you'll be doing well by yourself and them.
And do you have any comments on how to keep them? Like once you hire and once you bring them to Japan, how to keep the great talent from leaving the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately, if they're starting their own company and doing so, then they'll have kind of found and created their space to stay. I also think that maybe people that came and don't stay are because there aren't necessarily the employment opportunities that they would look for or that they would have in terms of their track that they might be able to have in their home country. And that's why if there are kind of more advanced tracks for people that are outside of the roles that traditionally don't require native Japanese, then there'll be more and more reasons for them to stay here and to be happy here, to buy a house here, to build a family here. So I think in terms of the quality of life, there's every reason to stay here. But in terms of professional opportunities, without Japanese, it's limited. And the more alternative opportunities we create for those people that don't require native Japanese, the better.
Thanks. And Oya?
Yeah, in terms of how to keep or attract global talent, is that I think what really is lacking now is branding of Japan. So Japan as a brand should be much better represented outside Japan. USA does that. That's why like many entrepreneurs outside US, they want to go to Silicon Valley or, in the US, New York, to build their companies. I think Japan should have that branding as well. Japan, the next question is, can Japan have such a strong brand? Yes, because Japan is a great country to live. It's safe, it's clean, it's convenient. When I say these things, because we are used to living in Japan, it doesn't, sound so different or important. But actually, here in downtown LA, when I walk after 7 p.m., I don't feel safe. And this is a very basic thing that you want to have in a country that you want to live. And Japan has a great culture, great food, everything. Lifestyle in Japan is great. That's why I got hooked as much as other foreign fellows as well. I have been living here for 18 years and I plan to live and even die in Japan. So I think like Japan should, build on this brand more. Japan is working a lot on inbound tourism. However, not for global talent to come and live and work here. However, though, I can say one case example for blue collars. Now for blue collars sourcing, there is a great and a little bit complicated supply chain to bring more blue collars into Japan, all from, Southeast Asian countries, now even from Mongol and, other countries as well. So I think maybe some similar thing should be made for the, high-skilled talent as well.
Okay, thanks. I know you have more questions, but I think we're up against time. So let's continue our conversation during breaks, maybe throughout the day. But in this panel, we started with talking about the positive and negatives of Japanese startup ecosystem. But as we talked, I realized it's not good or bad. It's just different, and we have to adapt to the market that we are in. But we seem to have more opportunity than people realize, both inside and outside of Japan. And maybe one of the big thing that we can do is the branding, or changing the narrative and telling the story. And I think these three panelists today did just that. So thanks, and let's give a big round of applause for three panelists.